We begin tonight with the death of a Del Rio mother whose friends say her kindness touched everyone she met.
Video showing Del Rio police escorting the sisters out of a home in handcuffs. Tonight, police have not released a motive. Additional charges could be on the way.
Only one of them had a son.
Broad daylight. A busy road. Cars rolling past a fast food drive-through like it's any other Thursday afternoon. And in the middle of all that noise and normalcy, a young mother is on the pavement, bleeding out in front of strangers who never got the chance to help her. No alley. No shadows. No cover of night. Just a sidewalk, a stream of traffic, and dozens of witnesses who watched it happen and couldn't stop it. Less than 3 hours later, two of the women accused of putting her there are riding in the back of a police car, laughing. One of them leans toward the window and sticks her tongue out at the camera, like she's posing for a photo, not being booked for murder. That single image is the reason you've probably heard this name before you ever learned her story. It spread everywhere, clipped, shared, argued over, while the woman underneath it all, a mother of 5 who spent her life taking care of everyone around her, became an afterthought to her own death. But that clip isn't the story. It's the last few seconds of something much bigger. A phone call that came too late, a photo that vanished from the internet almost as fast as it appeared, and a motive that, as of tonight, still doesn't exist in any official record. Before we go further, this case involves graphic violence and disturbing details that some viewers may find difficult to sit with. We're not going to sensationalize what happened to her. We're going to walk through it carefully, and only with what's actually been confirmed. If this is your first time here, welcome to Unsolved Files. Hit subscribe so you don't miss where this one goes, and drop a comment letting us know what city or country you're watching from tonight. Now let's go back to the beginning. It was Thursday, June 25th. Just after 2 in the afternoon, Del Rio police received a call from Val Verde Regional Medical Center. A woman had come in with multiple stab wounds. Hospital staff didn't have the full story yet. All they knew was a patient had arrived injured, and the injuries were serious enough to require more than what the local facility could provide. Officers were dispatched to the hospital first, not a crime scene because that's where the case started for law enforcement, with a victim already in a treatment room, not a body on a street. While medical staff worked, investigators started asking questions. Where had she come from? Who brought her in? What happened before she got there? Those questions led them away from the hospital and toward a residential address a few minutes away, on East 10th Street. That's where detectives determined the assault had actually taken place. Not at the hospital, not in transit, at a house earlier that afternoon. Given the severity of her injuries, doctors made the call to transfer her to a trauma center in San Antonio, roughly 2.5 hours away by ground, but reachable faster by air. She was flown out that afternoon, while investigators stayed behind in Del Rio, working the scene she'd been taken from. The woman fighting for her life in that hospital was Caroline Paya. Friends and family knew her as Caro. She was 32 years old. At that point, nobody watching this unfold outside her immediate circle knew her name yet. There was no viral video. No headlines. Just a woman in critical condition, a house on East 10th Street that investigators were now treating as a crime scene, and a phone starting to ring among the people who loved her, calls that, for at least one friend, would arrive minutes too late to answer. That's where the investigation began. Caroline Paya was 32 years old. She had a twin sister and she was raising 5 children on her own, the oldest just 17. People who knew her described someone who was, in a lot of ways, defined by that role. Not because it was the only thing about her, but because it was the thing she leaned into hardest. Friends say she didn't just raise her own kids, she looked out for other people's too and made herself available in ways that went beyond what most people would offer. Zelina Ochoa knew her longer than almost anyone. The two of them met as teenagers, both of them young mothers at the time, both still trying to finish school while raising kids. According to Ochoa, Paya would watch her son so she could catch up on schoolwork. A small thing on its own, but the kind of small thing that builds a friendship over years. Later, when Ochoa moved into her first apartment, Paya showed up with baby clothes, a television, and whatever else she had lying around that could help someone start over. Ochoa has said that if Paya had something and you needed it, she'd give it to you, even if it was the last of what she had. Ochoa put it simply. She said Paya was born to be a mother. That it wasn't a role she settled into, it was the thing she was actually built for. Cristina Salinas knew a different side of that same friendship. The night before the attack, the two of them were together, cooking. Paya's daughter was there too. By every account, it was an ordinary evening. Nothing about it stood out at the time. The next day, Salinas got a call from Paya in the early afternoon. She missed it. Minutes later, the assault on East 10th Street had already happened, and Payna was on her way to the hospital. Salinas has said she believes that if she'd picked up, she might have been there. Whether that would have changed anything is impossible to know, and it's not something anyone can answer for her. But it's the kind of detail that stays with a person, and it's part of why this case has hit as hard as it has in Del Rio, a city small enough that a loss like this doesn't stay contained to one family. What comes through in both accounts isn't a dramatized version of who she was. It's a fairly consistent, ordinary picture. A mother who showed up for her kids and for other people's, a friend who gave away what little she had, a woman with a normal night the evening before everything changed. That's the person investigators were working to get justice for when they turned their attention to the house on East 10th Street, and to the 3 women who were there with her that afternoon. The address investigators traced back to was in the 800 block of East 10th Street, a residence belonging to a young woman named Kyandra Renee Foz, 21 years old. Surveillance footage and video later reviewed by police showed Caroline Payna arriving at that address in a black pickup truck. According to the probable cause affidavit filed in the case, it didn't take long after she arrived for things to turn. The first person involved was Amaya Diaz, 19 years old. Video reviewed by investigators shows Amaya and Payna getting into an altercation almost immediately. At some point during that confrontation, Amaya is seen striking Payna, an injury visible afterward on the back of her shirt. What started as an altercation between 2 people didn't stay that way. Amaya's older sister, 21-year-old Kitty Mia Diaz, joined the assault next. Then Kyandra Foz, at whose home this was all taking place, became involved as well. For a period of time, 3 women were involved in an assault against 1 woman, on a residential street in the middle of the afternoon. It's worth pausing on that detail because it matters for what comes later in the investigation. This wasn't described by police as a single blow or a brief physical altercation that got out of hand. It was a sustained assault involving multiple people that escalated in stages rather than happening all at once. Eventually the fight was broken up. Investigators haven't detailed publicly who stepped in or how it ended, only that at some point it did. Payna was left with injuries serious enough that she needed emergency care. The 3 women who'd been involved left the scene shortly after. At this stage, none of the 3 had been arrested. Kitty Diaz, Amaya Diaz, and Kyandra Foz were, at that point, simply 3 people who'd been present during a violent altercation at a private residence. Not yet named publicly, not yet facing charges, and as far as they may have believed, not yet identified. That assumption wouldn't hold for long. Within hours, detectives would have surveillance footage, physical evidence from the scene, and witness accounts that placed all 3 of them at that house, involved in what had happened to Caroline Payna. But for now, the scene on East 10th Street had gone quiet. A woman was on her way to a hospital with injuries she wouldn't survive. 3 women who'd been at that house had scattered, one of them, as investigators would later discover, straight into a shower and a washing machine. Del Rio, a city of about 35,000 people, was about to become the center of a story that would spread far beyond it. But at that specific moment, in the immediate aftermath of the assault, none of that had happened yet. There was just a quiet street, an empty house, and an investigation that was only getting started. While doctors in San Antonio worked to stabilize her, the investigation back in Del Rio didn't slow down. Detectives treated the house on East 10th Street as an active crime scene from the moment they arrived, which mattered, because whatever evidence existed there wouldn't stay untouched for long. For the rest of that afternoon and into the evening, the case sat in a kind of holding pattern. Payna's condition was critical. The people responsible hadn't been arrested yet. And everyone involved, her family, her friends, the investigators building the case, was waiting on the same outcome for very different reasons. That wait ended around 9 o'clock that night. Investigators were notified that Caroline Payna had died from her injuries at the hospital in San Antonio. The moment that notification came in, everything about the case changed on paper. What had been an assault investigation became a homicide investigation. The charges being prepared against the 3 women involved were upgraded from assault to murder, effective immediately. For Payna's family, that notification meant something no piece of legal terminology could capture. For the investigation, it meant the clock on building a case had just gotten a lot more urgent, because at that point, 3 women who had allegedly taken part in a fatal assault were still out there, not yet in custody, with hours already behind them to get their stories straight, or worse. What detectives did with those hours is where this case turns from a tragedy into an actual investigation worth breaking down. Stick around because the next part is where it gets procedural, and where 3 specific decisions ended up working against the people who made them. With the case now a homicide investigation, Del Rio detectives moved fast. And what they built over the next few hours is worth walking through in detail because it shows exactly how a case like this gets solved. Not through a confession, not through a lucky break, but through methodical, unglamorous police work done in a short window of time. Investigators worked from 3 main sources of evidence, and each one played a different role in identifying the people involved. The first was surveillance video. Cameras in the area around East 10th Street captured footage relevant to the case, and detectives pulled it early. This is often the first thing investigators go after in a case like this, because unlike witness memory, camera footage doesn't shift or get uncertain over time. It shows what happened, who was there, and in what order things unfolded. In this case, that footage reportedly captured Pena's arrival at the residence, and portions of the altercation itself. The second source was physical evidence collected directly from the scene. Once detectives treated the East 10th Street residence as an active crime scene, that meant standard forensic protocol, documenting the scene, collecting anything that could establish what happened and who was involved. Evidence like this doesn't always make headlines the way video does, but it's often what actually holds a case together in court, because it's harder to dispute than an eyewitness account. The third source was witness interviews. Because the assault happened at a residence rather than somewhere isolated, there were people who saw at least parts of what happened, or who could speak to who was present. Investigators interviewed those witnesses in the hours after the assault, while memories were still fresh and before accounts had a chance to drift or get influenced by outside conversation. Individually, none of these 3 sources may have been enough on their own. Together, they let detectives move from an unidentified assault to 3 named suspects in a matter of hours, reportedly within roughly 2 hours of the initial dispatch to the hospital. For context, that's an unusually fast identification timeline for a case involving multiple suspects and no immediate confession. It reflects a department that treated this as a priority from the first phone call, not one that pieced things together slowly over days. Once investigators had those 3 names, they moved to make arrests. Kitty Mia Diaz and Amaya Diaz were located and taken into custody around 4 o'clock that afternoon. Police described the arrest as occurring without incident. No chase, no standoff, no resistance. On its face, that sounds like a straightforward arrest. What happened in the time between the assault and that arrest is where the case gets more complicated, and where the physical evidence becomes especially important. According to the probable cause affidavit, when officers arrived at the home where the sisters were taken into custody, both women had already showered and changed clothes. That alone might not mean much on its own. Showering and changing clothes isn't inherently suspicious behavior. But investigators didn't stop at noticing they'd changed. They searched the home. During that search, officers found clothing inside a washing machine. Specifically, clothing that matched what Kitty Diaz had been seen wearing in the surveillance footage from the assault. This detail matters more than it might seem at first. In criminal cases, what happens after an alleged crime can be almost as important as the crime itself. Prosecutors often look for what's sometimes referred to as consciousness of guilt, actions taken by a suspect that suggest they knew they'd done something wrong and tried to cover it up. Changing clothes is common enough on its own. Running those specific clothes through a washing machine, in the roughly 2-hour window between an assault and an arrest, is the kind of detail that can carry real weight with a jury, because it suggests an attempt to destroy potential evidence, like blood or fiber transfer, before police could examine it. Whether that clothing yields anything from a forensic standpoint is something that would come out through lab testing, and it's not something that's been publicly detailed yet. But the fact that it was found mid-cycle, matching footage from the scene, is now part of the official case file, and it's the kind of detail that separates a circumstantial case from one built on stronger physical evidence. Kyandra Foz, the third suspect, wasn't at the same location as the sisters. She was arrested separately, a short time after Kitty and Amaya Diaz were taken into custody. Like the sisters' arrest, hers was also described by police as occurring without incident. By the end of that day, all 3 women who investigators had identified through video, physical evidence, and witness accounts were in custody. What had been an assault investigation that morning and a homicide investigation by 9 that night, was now a case with 3 formally arrested suspects by the time the sun had fully set. Once Pena's death was confirmed, the charges against all 3 were formally elevated to murder. Kitty Mia Diaz, Amaya Diaz, and Kyandra Foz were no longer simply people who'd been present at a violent altercation. They were now defendants in a homicide case, booked and processed under charges that would follow them into a courtroom. It's worth stepping back here to appreciate what this section actually represents. This wasn't a case that dragged on for weeks with no leads, or one solved by accident. It was solved through video review, forensic collection, and interviews conducted within hours. The kind of investigative work that rarely gets attention on its own, because it doesn't come with a dramatic moment attached to it. The dramatic moment came later in a completely different context, and that's what we're covering next. There was one more person on scene that afternoon whose footage would end up defining how the entire country came to know this case. An independent journalist named Michael Elizondo, who happened to be filming near the arrests as they unfolded. According to Elizondo's own account, the first arrest didn't strike him as anything unusual. One of the suspects was taken into custody and placed in the patrol car, and by his description, it looked like a routine arrest, the kind he'd likely filmed dozens of times before without a second thought. The second arrest was different, and it's the moment that ended up traveling far beyond Del Rio. Elizondo said the woman being arrested appeared to be in a good mood, smiling. According to his account, once she was in the back of the patrol car, the window came down and she leaned toward it, sticking her tongue out and mugging for the camera, seemingly unbothered by what was happening around her. He's also described her sister as laughing during the arrest, and at one point jokingly telling him to stop recording. That footage is what turned a local homicide case into a story with national attention. Not the assault itself and not the investigation that led to the arrests, but roughly a few seconds of video showing two women who appeared, at least on camera, to be treating the moment as something closer to entertainment than a murder arrest. It's understandable why that footage hit as hard as it did. There's a natural, almost instinctive reaction to seeing someone smile in a moment tied to someone else's death, especially when that someone was a mother of 5. It creates a kind of gap between what the moment should look like and what it actually showed, and that gap is uncomfortable in a way that's hard to look away from. But it's worth being precise about what that footage actually is and what it isn't. What it is: video of two people's behavior and demeanor during an arrest. What it isn't: evidence of guilt, a confession, or a legal finding of any kind. Demeanor on camera, however it comes across, isn't something a court weighs the same way it weighs surveillance footage of an assault, physical evidence from a scene, or witness testimony. People process high-stress situations in wildly different ways, and reactions on camera don't reliably indicate what someone did or didn't do beforehand. That distinction doesn't make the footage any less unsettling to watch, and it's exactly why the clip spread the way it did. But it's also why this case can't be understood through that clip alone. The actual case against Kitty Diaz, Amaya Diaz, and Kyandra Faz rests on the surveillance video, the physical evidence, and the witness accounts covered earlier, not on a few seconds of behavior in the back of a patrol car. That footage made this case famous. It's not what's going to decide it in court. What actually decides it is where this story goes next. So where does this case actually stand right now? All three women, Kitty Mia Diaz, Amaya Diaz, and Kyandra Faz, are formally charged with murder. According to court filings, each of them is being held on $5 million bail. That's a significant figure, and it's usually a signal of how seriously a court is treating the charges, and the perceived risk of releasing a defendant before trial. For context, bail set that high generally reflects both the severity of the charge and, in many cases, a judge's assessment of flight risk or danger to the community. What hasn't been released is a motive. Police have not said publicly why this altercation happened, what triggered it, or what relationship, if any, existed between Caroline Pena and the three women charged with her death. That's an important distinction to sit with. There's been no confirmation of prior conflict, no confirmed history between them, nothing officially tying this to a specific dispute. Whatever led Pena to that house on East 10th Street that afternoon remains, at least publicly, unexplained. That absence of a stated motive isn't unusual this early in a homicide case. Prosecutors and investigators often hold that information back deliberately, either because it's still being confirmed, or because releasing it prematurely could complicate the case they're building. It doesn't mean investigators don't know. It means they haven't said. The investigation itself remains open. Detectives have indicated that additional charges are possible as evidence continues to be processed, which includes forensic analysis of the physical evidence collected from the scene, and potentially the clothing recovered from the washing machine during the sisters' arrest. If that clothing yields anything through lab testing, it could shape how the case develops from here, and whether the charges against any of the three women shift in the months ahead. As of now, no trial date has been set. Cases like this typically take months, sometimes longer, to move from arrest to trial, especially when they involve multiple defendants and an active, ongoing evidence review. That means the version of this story that exists right now is not the final version. What happens in a courtroom, the evidence prosecutors choose to present, the defense each of these three women mounts, and whatever verdict eventually comes out of it, is still ahead. That's exactly the part of this case most true crime coverage won't stick around for. The viral clip gets millions of views in the first week, and then most channels move on to the next case. The actual resolution, the part that determines what happens to Kitty Diaz, Amaya Diaz, and Kyandra Faz, and what kind of accountability Caroline Pena's family actually gets, plays out later, quietly, in a courtroom most people never hear about. If you want to be watching when that happens, subscribe to Unsolved Files now. We follow cases like this all the way through, from arrest to trial to sentencing, and we'll have the update the moment a court date is set. Zelina Ochoa has said something since the arrest that's worth ending on. She pointed out that even with 3 people now in custody, none of that changes what her friend's children lost. In her words, those 3 women will eventually get to see their own families again. Caroline Pena won't. She's a memory now. That's not a dramatic flourish. It's just an accurate way of describing what an arrest actually does and doesn't fix. It holds people accountable through the legal system. It doesn't undo anything. Pena's 5 children, the oldest just 17, are now navigating life without their mother, at the exact age when most of them still needed her most. That's the part of this case that doesn't show up in a probable cause affidavit or a bail hearing, and it's the part that outlasts every headline this story generates. Before we close out, one more thing that matters. Kitty Mia Diaz, Amaya Diaz, and Kyandra Faz have been charged with murder. They have not been convicted of anything. Under the law, all 3 are presumed innocent unless and until a court finds otherwise. Whatever conclusions people have drawn from a few seconds of video, that footage isn't a verdict, and it's not our place or anyone's to treat it like one. That determination belongs to a courtroom, not a comment section. This case is still active. The evidence is still being processed. And at some point, likely months from now, this story is going to move into a courtroom, where the facts we've laid out here will actually be tested. We'll be covering that when it happens. If you want to see how this ends, not the version that trends online, but the version that actually gets decided under oath, subscribe to Unsolved Files now so it's already in your feed the moment there's a trial date.